Okay, so the next step here is we're going to add on a nice to have functionality. Now it might be nice to see all of our invoices listed in one place in a database. Something like Airtable or Coda, or maybe bubble.io, or even a Google Sheet, somewhere that we can just see here's all the invoices that we've received, and our bookkeeper can just check them off or use it as a reference for downloading the files, etc. So it's kind of like our electronic invoice filing system, right? Now, what we've got here is just a basic table, which I've called bills. I'm not going to go into Airtable and how to work with Airtable. You can use whatever system you like, but we just want to have a look at or think about what's the core functionality again for this nice to have, right? So you'll notice a common theme here. I'm always starting with what's the core function that I'm trying to achieve. And then I'm adding on the nice to haves after I've done the core function, right? So if I could only have one thing, what would I want to have with this thing that I'm adding, right? What's the most important thing? Now, if we're thinking about that, well, the most important thing is that I just need to log the emails. And when I log that, I need to have maybe a link back to the original email. So I can just click that and open it in one step. I probably want to have maybe the sender email address, maybe the subject line, maybe even the body text of the email would be nice, the date that it was received. And because we're uploading it to Google Drive, it would make sense to also have the URL for that file. So I can just download it directly or click to open it directly. And then we've got some nice to have fields here, which is parsing out what the total amounts are from the invoice, and then assigning it to a supplier, right? That's another nice to have. And then here we're concatenating, so we're creating a name from multiple fields as the reference ID. That's another nice to have, right? So now we've got our core functions. Let's look at adding this to our scenario. Now we'll just go back to our original example that we're sort of copying from here. And this one here, you'll be able to download this as part of the course. You can download it and literally just import it into your Make account and then just update the connections and run from that, or you can follow along and build it from scratch. So right now we've got this module, that module, and this module. We can ignore these two in the middle, and we want to then add our Airtable modules next. So let's add our Airtable modules. We'll click on Add, type in Airtable. Now Airtable, you can start with the free plan on Airtable. I believe their API is available on the free plan. You could also use Coda or Google Sheets. Airtable at the time of this video, they've got a 10,000 row limit, so that should be enough for most people for a while. So here we've just selected our invoices base, and then we're just going to select our bills table. Now here's where we start to get interesting, right? So before, when we uploaded our file, we just uploaded the primary file. We didn't manipulate the file name or anything. Now, Google Drive is a little bit hard to read here, but we want to have a date of when this file was received going in. So we want to not use today's date, right? Because this scenario could be processing from 6 months ago, 12 months ago, if we started from all time, right? So here we want to put in the date that we actually received that email, not the date that we processed the email. Now, the date that we received the email, that's going to be in our Gmail Watch Emails module step, right? So here we're just going to sort of scan down. We're going to find something that says date. There it is there. Now, we just want to first hover over that and find out what type of data that is, because this date could be a text, it could be a number string, because it could be the Unix timestamp, which is just a string of numbers, and it could also be a date data type. Now here we can see in that little red pop-up that shows, so you can see as I hover there's a little pop-up that pops up. We can see between those two arrows we've got the word date, and that means that this is a date data type, right? So it's read as a date data type, it's stored as a date data type. If we put this in our field that's expecting a date, I know that everything's going to be read from this date data type correctly, and it's going to be parsed into our Airtable date field correctly. Now we can see here as well that we've got our time zone of the account, and that's in Asia, Bangkok, which is where I am. And if we hover over here, on the actual file. I might open it up here actually. Let's have a look for date. Here we are. So if I hover over the date there, you'll see there's another little pop-up. And this pop-up shows you how that date actually is written in the database. Now, what we see is something different to how it's actually written. We see the humanized version of that date. Here, in the pop-up, we see the actual system version of that date. Now, this is a universal date-time format, and if we look at it closely, we've got the year, 4 values, dash 2 values for month, dash 2 values for day, and then we've got the letter T, which means T for time, and then we've got 14, which is 24-hour time, so that's 2 p.m., 55, which is the minutes, 04, which is the seconds, and then 000, which is the milliseconds, and then Z, which means that this is UTC neutral, right? This is UTC neutral time. Now, we're in Asia, Bangkok, and so we can see that this is actually storing it as 2:55 p.m. neutral time. However, in my local time zone, I think I'm what, 6 hours, 7 hours ahead, 8 hours ahead, so 2 to 10, yep, 8 hours ahead of neutral time. And so I'm seeing it in my system as 10:55 p.m., right? So it's really important to have your account set up with the right date time, because if I was somewhere else on a different time zone, but my account was on a different time zone, I'd be seeing a different time here, right? And then it's also important to know how that date is coming in, because that date might not be coming in as a date time format date. It might be coming in with a UTC +6, -6, whatever. And so we have to allow for that when we're working with dates. Now, we covered dates in a whole separate module, whole separate course actually, in the advanced course. So I'm just going to give you, that was just a really quick rundown on dates within this mini course that we've got. So now we've briefly discussed dates. We've mapped in the date. I'm going to go ahead and map in the rest of the values here, and then we'll have a look at what we should be doing next. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've mapped in all the values here. You'll notice that I've also put in the Google File ID as well as the web content link. Now, the reason why I've put in the file ID is because I may want to maybe move that file to a different subfolder or rename that file from a field in Airtable when I change a field there. I might want to do something to manipulate that file, right? So it's much easier to manipulate things, to change things, when we have the ID of that thing. Now, I know that I'm not going to be able to change something on an email, so I'm not going to store the email ID. However, I could store it if I want, but if I wanted to just make sure that I only create one record for this particular email, we'll show you how to add that in a second, and I could just use the message link because that's going to be unique to this email. So here we've got our record being mapped, and we can just click on OK to save those changes. Now, what's important to note here is that this is only going to create one record. So we've iterated through the attachments, and only one attachment had a file to upload. So therefore, only 1 out of 10 made it to this module, which means that only 1 out of 10 is going to make it to this module. Now, what we need to do is we need to make sure that if it didn't have a file to upload, we still want to log it in the database, right? Because maybe it's got a link to the file in the email. Maybe we want to log it just because the invoice is actually in the email itself and not linking anywhere. So what we've done is we've just copied the creator record, and I've just dragged and dropped it, and I've connected it between the watch emails and the iterate attachments. And what I want to do here is now that I've got this router in place, and if you want, I'll just redo that step. So here we've got our connection, and I'll right click on this, and I could clone or I could copy, doesn't particularly matter. We'll just do a copy, and then we'll do a paste, right click and paste. Now I've got this module sort of floating around, and you can see I can just drag it between these connections, and it will sort of sticky between them, right? Bounce between them. But if I want to create a router, I can click on the bubble before, and I'll drag this between these two modules, and you'll see this sort of router pops up, right? So now we've created two possible routes. I let go, and I'll have the router sitting there ready to go. So now I've got my 2 routes. So what we need to do now is think about, okay, if we have attachments, and we know that we have attachments, well, now we want to iterate those emails, right? We want to iterate those attachments, and for each attachment, we then want to create a record in the database. We might have an email with like 3 invoices attached, right? And we want to create 3 records in the database. So what we'll do is we'll add a filter here. Now to add the filter, we click on the actual route, the dots, and then we want to add a condition. We can label the filter later, we'll come back to that. Our condition will be that our attachments, and here's our attachments here, you can see it's a list because we've got those square brackets, and we'll just put our attachments, and here we'll select, and we know that it's a list, so it's going to be an array, so we can look at our array operators, and we can say, well, how many things are in this list? So we'll say if this list, this array, length, number of things, is greater than 0. Right, so if there is more than 0 things in this list, that means if there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 100, 500, whatever, it's going to go through this route now. So we'll just put our label in, has attachments. That's one way that you could do it. You could also do it as if the attachment data, the first item, data, is not empty, right, exists, right? As a basic operator, that would be another way to achieve the exact same filter. Slightly different way to filter it, but same result. So here we're saying, does this list contain things in the list? If it's greater than 0, then we want to iterate those things and create the record in Airtable. Now here we've got the option, we could create the same filter. We could say, does this attachment have 0 things in the list, right? We could put that as a filter. We could, if we wanted to, just save ourselves a bit of time here, and we can use what's called a fallback route. So if I just select yes onto here, we'll just type in fallback as the name. What that means is if an email comes to this router and it can't go through this filtered route here, and there's no other routes that it can take, then it will fall back to this fallback route. Now, if we were to add another route here and this didn't have a filter on, well, now it's got a route to take, and so it's not going to fall back to this. But if we were to add another filter here and it didn't reach this first filter, didn't reach the second filter, it will fall back to this one here. So we'll just put in the fallback, and then we can probably get rid of the Google Drive mapping here because there's no file to download or upload, and the rest of the mapping can stay the same. Now you'll notice here that when I copy this module, it copies all the mapping as well. Okay, so now we've got our Airtable files added. We'll save that and let's run a test. Now remember, I started this from all time, so I've only processed 10 out of maybe 100 emails so far. So here's where we'll test our filters. We've got our 10 emails coming in, and then we're going to see how do they filter, which routes are they going to go down, and what's going to happen. Okay, so our email ran. We had 10 returned emails because that's what our filter is. And we can see here that all of them didn't have any attachments, right? So we just want to make sure that our filters are working because we've got 10 created rows in Airtable. We just want to quickly go through those 10 and just make sure that this filter that we've got set up is working correctly. So there's no attachments on that one, no attachments on that one. So it looks like, yep, just looks like there was no attachments. So it was probably a bad one to test, but you'll get this happening, you know, from time to time. And sometimes you kind of just have to run it a few times until you get something that's going to go down this route to test it, right? But I know that this logic is correct, although I would suggest always testing it to confirm. But here we can see that the module that we added, that's working, and that's one of the core things that we want to test. So if we scroll down, we should have 10 things on the very bottom here that were added. 2022 received. These are all the times that it was received. These all didn't have files, so that's why they're all blank. But we've got you know, the subject names and the email senders and everything coming in. So that is the mapping of emails into the database and adding some routers and filters as well. We've covered that briefly here as well. and also using the fallback route. So it's a bit of a bonus there.